One of the most vital things we need to do as a parent is take an inventory and an audit of our past. And we need to look at how our childhood and how we were raised impacts how we will raise our kids.
This is the Unleash Your Purpose podcast.
In psychology and the medical research, sometimes we call it ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. Other people call it intergenerational trauma or generational curses. And mind you, whatever you call it, it impacts us. Stories that we've told ourselves or what people who have loved us very much have told us or done to us impacts us. And if we're not careful, we can pass those on to our kids. And I know for me personally, that's really come full circle. And I've been so trying to discover that the wounds that I have, what I wanted to make sure is that I never pass those on to my kids. A lot of you may know is I was raised by a single mom. My mom moved my sister and I from Michigan to Phoenix to kind of get us a new beginning. I had my dad lived there. He did the very best he could, wasn't super involved in my life, and the environment and the family around were really involved in drugs and not a really good environment. My mom needed to get us out of there. And as we got to Phoenix, I talked to my dad less and less frequently and saw him less and less and less. And as a young man, I was trying to develop and trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be I didn't really have a picture or an example of what that was. My mom did the very best she could. I remember she would try to take us camping and none of us knew how to set up a tent. And I remember one night we slept in this tent and within minutes the thing has collapsed and we're all covered by the tent at 3 a.m. just laughing. She went and bought a toolkit for us and it was called Do It Herself toolkit and they were pink. And I was like, thanks, Mom. God bless her. She always wanted to make sure I got involved in a sport, but she knew nothing about sports and I didn't have any model for that, so I skipped around a bunch of sports and never really landed one. And I remember there was this moment when I was probably 15 years old that I went back to Michigan to visit my dad. And he didn't even realize the thing he said. In our own brain, there are things that are said to us that can fall deep within our soul, that just cut to the depths of us. And he was feeling such a moment of regret in his life that he was never around. And he said in that moment, he says, I just wish I could have been around to show you what it means to be a real man. And what he meant is he wished he could have taught me things which I wanted. But how I heard that as a 14-year-old boy is I am not a man and I am not good enough. And it haunted me for decades. About 5 years ago, Sarah and I went through marriage therapy that turned into my individual therapy because this was a wound that I have stuffed down. The reality is what we do so often, we are stuffers. When there is pain, most times we don't want to deal with it, especially as men. I will just push it down and keep driving forward. But what happens is that root, if it's not pulled out, will produce some type of fruit. And if that root isn't pulled out, that fruit that is produced will not be good. And the fruit that was brewing up inside of me was affecting my marriage and bitterness and frustration. And I was being quick to anger and not like the godly man that I was striving to be. And as I was going through my individual work, I realized that I had these beliefs about who I was, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not a man, that I'm not worthy. All of these things that actually impacted my whole self. And part of the counseling journey that I went through is he said, the guy said, you have to tell your wife and you need to tell your dad. I had such a lump in my throat. And about a year after that, I was in Michigan. I already at this point had 3 or 4 kids. And I was presenting at a conference and I invited him to come up to see me for the conference. And it's just him and I, and we're sitting at a bar. And a lot of times we don't have a lot to talk about because we don't really know each other all that well. And we're making small talk. And I just knew I had to say, hey, Dad, I forgive you for everything that has happened. And I saw this look come over his eyes. And what I realized in that moment is my dad did the very best he could have. He was raised by a guy who was horrific to him, abusive to the next level. Most of his family has not been successful because of that. They're in prison, have passed away, but my dad has been successful. What I told him is Dad, you stood on Grandpa's shoulders. You stood on his shoulders. And you know what? You made sure that mom always got child support, that you came and visited and you sent a card. You killed it. And I forgave him. And for me, what I realized in that moment, I was like releasing over. Because so often I always wanted to get back at him. But when I would say something smart aleck or a smart ass comment to him or prove to him that I was a man that was good enough, and I would say hurtful things to him just to piss him off, it would make me feel good in the moment, but it would make me actually feel like a piece of crap later on, because that's not forgiveness. And I did never released it and gave it over. And for me, it was that moment I just needed to release. And I said, oh, I get to stand on my dad's shoulders. What an honor. And this weekend, actually, my dad flew out to go to the Lions game and the Cardinals game. And the reason he came out was because I called him and said, hey, Dad, I got tickets to the game. I want you to come out. And he was so pumped up, and he gave me a Lions shirt, which my son and I did not want to wear because we're Cardinals for life. But we put on our Lions shirts and our Cardinals hat, and he got to go to the game with his son and his grandson. In my head, it was like me standing on his shoulders and then my son standing on mine. And guess what? My kids don't have to face that. And the dysfunction of the center's name gets to stop with me. I get to choose that. I get to say enough is enough, that the center's family dysfunction is done. The dad's ceiling should always be the kid's floor. What does that mean? Is that my success, my healing, my generosity should always be where my kid starts, and they can go only but upwards from there. It came kind of full circle. Earlier this summer, I went on a mastermind retreat. I actually brought my son, one of my oldest sons, my 14-year-old son, to this mastermind with me. It was for dads, for business owners and dads and everything. And I said, hey, son, come with me. So we flew out to Denver. He called it Dad School. And it was so cool. We're with all of these dads talking about life and talking about ministry and business and what does it mean to integrate this all together. My son was just watching my every move and had a blast traveling together. But there was the last night that we were there, I'm in this room with a bunch of other entrepreneurs and business owners. From an outsider, I am successful. And I know I am. And I'm say that humbly, is like, looking at me as other business guys, like, hey, he has 400 employees. He has a good life. He's had some success. But that actually means nothing. See, I remember I was sitting in this room with all these other business owners who all knew each other really well. And I was kind of the new guy and the outsider. And with my son, and I'm like, what am I? The old thoughts come running in my head. I am not enough. What am I doing here? I am worthless. I'm a piece of crap. This confident man who knows he is loved says I am a piece of crap. These voices go racing in my head, and I have anxiety brewing up inside of me, and there's nothing that I can do in that moment. And at the end of the night, it's like 9 o'clock at night, and they say, hey, we have these breakout sessions. There's a business breakout, there's financing breakouts, there's fatherhood one, and then there's other one about a prayer one, because it was a Christian thing. And I was like, I knew I needed to do that one, and I didn't particularly want to. So I told my son, I said, hey, go to the room. I'm going to go to this dad's breakout. And I went to this prayer room thing, and they take us through this Christian meditation where you're trying to be still. And he said to kind of bring up these thoughts that you've had about yourself that are not necessarily helpful. So mine came up to my mind really quick. And then he had us walk through this meditation where you sit you close your eyes and you sit at a place where you have the most peace in your life. Where do you experience most joy? And for me, I use the word heaven on earth. And for me, it's in Flagstaff, sitting on the back porch and looking at the trees and experiencing the sounds of nature. And I'm sitting there, and he says, imagine Jesus coming up to you. And he does this imagery with it and puts his hand on your chest and tells you you're loved and says you are enough. I kid you not, I probably had not shed a tear in a year and a half. And I'm praying to God, and I just feel the presence so strongly. And I have tears streaming down my face and feel the presence of God, and says, I am enough. And I could breathe. And I was like, this is why I came. And then to fast forward, I walk back to our room, and my son Javi's there. And he said, what'd you learn in dad school? He said, what'd you do in dad school? I'm like, oh, well, it's crazy. Like, they did this prayer thing. You imagine Jesus around. He's like, oh, really? That's cool. I go, do you want to try it? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we're sitting in our hotel room, and I literally just had him sit down and I walked him through this imagery of God being with him. He's telling me this, he imagines himself being on a soccer field and how he feels, and we walk through it, and then he opens up his eyes and he just says he's like, I've never felt like that before. Never felt God like that. And we're just sitting there in silence, and he starts getting emotional, and he says, I feel like what I heard God say is that I am enough. I am enough. And I got chills because the exact word that I heard, and I did not tell him, is that I am enough. These two different stories come colliding together. And I asked him, I said, where have you felt like you weren't enough? And he got silent for a while. And he kind of talk about his past story and his trauma that has happened and the things he's experienced before he was adopted and the things he heard and felt, which were so hurtful for him. And it was the first time he shared any of that. But he said, I know God says I'm enough. And he said that I know that you say I'm worthy and enough. This is how the power of a story happens. This is how families' stories can be redeemed. I was trying to heal myself and then in turn share my experience with my kid and watching as he was healed too. And I'm like, this kid gets to stand on my shoulders. That now he's 14 years old and is healing and know that he is enough and that he's worthy and that he can forgive those past relationships and family members who have hurt him. He can forgive because it holds him down and he gets to be free from that. This is going to be a process for him. But I knew in that moment of going there that this was the reason I was called to go to this conference. And it's so interesting that your belief system and these voices can go through your head over and over again. But what I'm noticing as I get older and as I believe in as I get healing and realize who I really am, is the voices start to get quieter. When I say I am a nobody, or I say I am not enough, that voice gets duller and duller. And when I tell my son and my kids that they are loved and strong and brave, and let me tell you about you and how great you are, and that what you were created for, that you're going to do marvelous things, that God is with you. When I tell them those things, guess what? It dampers the voice in my head, and the generational curses and the intergenerational trauma and the ACE scores get healed. See, parents, we have the ability to heal our kids when we deal with our stuff. When we deal with our trauma, guess what? That passes down to our kids. We don't just have to pass on the hard stuff to our kids. We can pass on the healing and the hope to them. But it takes work. It takes intentionality. When Sarah and I talk about our parenting style, it's about intentional. It's like you can't just accidentally heal. You have to intentionally choose to heal. Your past is not your fault, but healing from it is your responsibility. Okay, let me say that again. Your past is not your fault, but healing from that past is your responsibility. If you want to be well, you have to make the effort and the work to become well. You have to choose to forgive, which is so hard. It's to have the hard conversation. It's for the adults to get help when you need help. It's to say, I'm going to stand on my parents' shoulders, even if it feels like there was no shoulders to stand on, because my kids deserve it. Because I get to look forward to the future and say, their life is going to be better. And guess what? My kids' life and future is bright, not because of what I have done, but because they have a king and a God who is so much greater. And I am choosing to make those steps to be well, and you can too.
Thanks for joining us for the Unleash Your Purpose podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. We'll see you next week.